Hey there. What's the will of God? What is God's will? What is God's will? His perfect and right will, the one thing that I'm supposed to do right now. Can you tell me? Because I need to know. Okay, so knowing the will of God seems to be the number one thing that every Christian woman wants to know, right? It's definitely the number one underlying desire for every woman that I've coached, and pretty much any woman that I ever talk to, ever. If I talk to them long enough, it always seems to come up. What is the will of God? I don't know. What should I do? I'm praying. I'm not hearing. Whatever the thing is, I want to make sure that I'm in God's will. In fact, when I put the question out to my email community asking what topics they would like me to talk about on this here podcast, guess what the very first request was? Yeah. So without further ado, this episode is all about how to know what the will of God is in your life. So let's get into it. Welcome to the Total Thrive Podcast. This is where we hang out together and chat about living our best lives as Christian women. I'm Jenna Dexter. I'm a certified Christian life coach, and I'm on a mission to ignite women like you to dream bigger, believe in all that is possible, and totally flourish in your life, your calling, and your God-given destiny. And knowing what God's will is in your life or in any given situation is kind of paramount, for totally flourishing in your life, wouldn't you say? We all go through things sometimes on a daily basis where we just want to know what to do, Since we are just mere mortals as women, and God is, God, we know that He knows best. We know that He knows the ultimate decision to make in any given situation, the perfect thing to do, the right direction to go in, and so forth. So, so can you just tell me, God, what is that thing, right? If we get a job offer, we might question, God, is this your will? Are you leading me to this job? Is this the perfect job position for me in this season of my life? If we are presented with an opportunity of any kind, as Christian women, we want to know that if we act on that opportunity or turn down that opportunity, we are in the right will of God. And on the flip side, if there are no opportunities or open doors, and we desperately need one, we need that breakthrough, we need that job offer, that provision, or maybe need to know what to do about a health situation, such as which doctor to trust, which treatment plan to pursue. Maybe we just have a longing to make a specific change, but we're questioning if it's God's will. Perhaps we question which church is the right church, which ministry role is the right ministry role. Obviously, which marriage proposal is the right one to accept. How to parent our kids in a given situation, and the list goes on and on. Basically, knowing God's will is connected to hearing His voice, right? And we desperately long to hear His voice and know what the heck to do. So I am going to get into some biblical and practical things that we can do to know God's will. But first, let me say this. I'm going to say something that might just blow your mind. Are you ready? Are you sure you're ready? Are you sitting down? And do you not have a hot cup of coffee that might spill all over you when your mind is totally blown? Okay, so here it is. Sometimes there is no one perfect will of God. Yeah, I said it. You heard me correctly. Because sometimes, and dare I say even oftentimes, God lets you choose. You might say that's God's perfect will in that moment, that His will is for you to choose. Now, in a moment, I'm going to get into those biblical principles of how you can know if that's God's will, for you to choose. But first, I want to tell you about the moment when this revelation blew my mind and totally changed my perception, my belief and understanding about how to know God's will, how to make decisions and all of that. It was 2016, and about 2 years after my initial transition from 23 years as a wife, homemaker, homeschool mom, all those things, into suddenly being alone, single, and recovering from the trauma of betrayal and divorce and the loss of my intact family as I knew it, into figuring out how to financially survive and, accepting my new life as a quote unquote divorced Christian woman, something that I was never ever supposed to be, and moving into the very different, but still very good and abundant life that God had for me. Because hashtag there is life after divorce, hashtag even for a Christian woman. So I was living in a place that God had basically handpicked for me as a place of healing and restoration. And then I got the visit from the landlords, a Christian couple who knew how much I adored the place that I was living in. And basically, they were there to inform me that they were selling the property and that I had 45 days to move. Yeah, 45 days to find a place, get approved, get all the things in order, and move. And while I was shocked and somewhat sad, I was mostly, as much as I loved the place, I was mostly like, okay, God, what else do you have for me? Because I knew that I could trust that he would provide and that he would lead me wherever I was quote unquote supposed to go. I knew that he had led me to that place. And I knew that if the season for that place was coming to an end, then he had something else for me, possibly much better. So basically, I spent the next, few weeks of my 45 days trying to find a place and not finding a place. There just was nothing. There was nothing that I could afford and or didn't make me want to cry at the thought of living in it because of what I could afford for where my income level was at the time, and or that I was, getting accepted or whatever. I mean, there were just so few places to even apply for. And then the one that I was kind of excited about wasn't calling me back. And I'm like, ugh. And, I got to a point where I was just starting to get really desperate. And I'm like, hey, God, what's your will? What's your perfect will? What's the thing that I'm supposed to go do right here, right now? Where do I live? And I started thinking outside of the box. Okay, what if I don't live here in this particular town that I love? What if I, moved a little ways away? What if I moved back down to Southern California? I was in Northern California at the time. And then I started thinking even more outside of the box. What if I didn't live anywhere? As crazy as that sounds. What if I were able to figure out a way to travel? This is where, when I talk a lot about dreaming and I talk a lot about asking yourself if you could do anything you wanted, what would you do? And then I talk about how to make those things happen, like believing that things are actually more possible than you realize, all of that kind of stuff. I will link to some videos where I talk about some of that stuff. But right now, once I had this idea of maybe traveling, and after I got over the hurdle of how could I possibly do that if I can't afford anywhere to live, how could I, what, are you kidding me right now? But I started Googling and researching and coming up with some creative ideas. And I started to see that I think it could actually be possible. But wow, what a crazy thing to think about. And ultimately, I did go travel. I did go do the crazy dream. But that's not actually what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about today is the part about God's will, like, God, is this your will? I figured out a way that I think might actually work for me to go do this crazy thing, live the dream. But is that your will? Is that really what you want for me in this stage of my life? And that was the thing. That was okay, I spent a weekend like, God, what do I do? And what is the right thing? All of the stuff, right? Well, I ended up listening to a sermon by Eric Johnson that completely that was the mind-blowing, whoa, are you kidding me right now? And basically in the sermon, he's talking about how, he and his wife and his family, they're out of church, they're in ministry, they're doing their thing, but they have an opportunity to go to another country and get involved in ministry there. And they have an opportunity to go to some other state and get involved in ministry there. And he's like, so he has three options, door 1, 2, and 3. Which door do I go through? And so he's praying and he and his wife, they're praying, they're trying to figure out, God, what is your will? What is the thing you want me to do? And at the end of the day, God basically said to him, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And I will bless it. And this just totally blew my mind. Hey, just a quick reminder to go ahead and boop that like button, by the way, which would totally support this channel, and it would make me feel really good on my insides. And it would also help this video reach more people who would be impacted by it, all because you took a quick sec right now to boop that little like button. Thank you. Okay, so here are the biblical and practical things to do so that you can figure out God's will in a situation, whether or not he has a specific right one for you, or if his will is for you to choose. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and, dare I say, perfect will." So he tells you that you will be able to test and approve what his will is, but that part is after the part that is on you to do first. The knowing of his will comes as a result of you doing your part, basically. And your part is not to conform to the pattern of this world. The New Living Translation says, "Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, because as a daughter of the King, you are to live differently than that. You are in the world, but not of the world." In a moment, I'll talk more about how to position yourself to know God's will. But notice that the next part says, "Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is." The New King James says that you may prove what is that good and acceptable, perfect will of God. And the Greek word for this is I don't know how you say it. Dokimazo? Let's go with that. The Greek word is dokimazo, meaning I put to the test, prove, or examine. So maybe you think maybe you think you might know what God's will is. I thought maybe God might be saying, "Hey, go to Australia, New Zealand, or Europe." I wasn't sure where I was going to go, but somewhere. So maybe you think you know maybe what God's saying, what his will is, what he might want you to do. And one way to know if it's actually his will is to test it, examine it, and ultimately prove that it is in fact the will of God. Or maybe it wasn't the will of God. But maybe you accept that job opportunity and test it out. See if it feels right. See if it feels like a right fit for you. In 2018, I suddenly found myself having bizarre thoughts of moving to Colorado, where my younger daughter lived. And I wasn't sure that was a good idea. Like, do I want to live why am I even thinking about moving to Colorado? I was just sort of suddenly feeling like a change. I wasn't really sure why I was feeling this way, but everything started to align. Once I started having the thoughts about maybe moving, everything aligned, kind of like the angels from heaven speaking. But even while things were aligning perfectly and doors were opening and things were moving into place, it was still a massive decision. And it was still but is this God's will? I still wasn't really sure. And partly because I really wasn't sure that I was a Coloradan kind of person. I'm a very Californian kind of person. So at the end of the day, while I don't think I thought of it this way, as far as, testing the will of God, that's basically what I did. I'm like, well, let's go try it out. I even remember a conversation with my parents where I'm trying to get their input, because this is a bonus. One of the ways to know God's will is to get counsel from people that you trust and respect. And my parents are one of them. So I definitely talk to them about my big decisions typically. And I remember on the phone with my dad one time about this, and he's like, well, you know what? Why don't you go try it out and have an adventure for a while? And if it doesn't work out, there's no harm in moving back. You can always move back, All that to say is I decided to go for it. And wouldn't you know that, again, in hindsight, looking back at how all of that went, I did end up moving back to California with my daughter, because as it turned out, my daughter was in a not so great situation in Colorado, and she needed me. I didn't know it. And I was able to help her with that. And we ended up moving back to California together. And, she has told me, like, Mom, if you hadn't come to Colorado, I would still be there. I would still be living in that situation. And I'm praising God to this day that he led me there despite not knowing with 100% certainty when I took the leap of faith. So don't forget that part, because sometimes, that's what faith is. Faith is not 100% knowing, but trusting and believing and taking action on something anyway. So sometimes testing God's will takes a leap of faith to, quote, try it out. And you know what? This is another thing to pay attention to. Are you listening? If it wasn't God's will and you did it, he's not going to smite you. He is not going to shame you. He is not going to point his finger at you and say, oh, my little daughter, you weren't listening to me very good. Now were you? Now you went and did it. He's not going to do that, because if you are doing all the things, you're positioning yourself, as we're about to talk about. If God really wanted you to do something different and you were really listening and asking, he would have shown you. He would have made it clear. He would have closed doors. He would have done something. Okay, but now let's talk about how to position yourself to know God's will. I've known for a while now that I was going to write notes about this podcast episode soon, and I had been praying about exactly what to share. And just the other morning, as I spent time with God, soaking in his presence and talking to him and reading his word, I read Psalm 25, and I couldn't help but notice all the places that highlighted God giving direction, revealing plans for your life, teaching the proper path, making right decisions, and so forth. And then all of the accompanying things that we do on our part to know God's direction and all of the things. Okay, so this is from the Passion Translation, and it starts with, "Always I lift up my soul into your presence, Yahweh." So immediately, we're positioning ourselves in God's presence. Be there for me, God, for I keep trusting in you. So when we're seeking God's direction, we have to also trust him. Verses 4 and 5 say, "Direct me, Yahweh, throughout my life journey, so I can experience your plans for my life. Reveal the life paths that are pleasing to you. Escort me into your truth. Take me by the hand and teach me. For you are the God of my salvation. I have wrapped my heart into yours all day long." So our part in experiencing God's plans for our lives is to wrap our heart into his all day long. The New King James Version says, "On you I wait all the day." So basically, we're spending time with him. We're being intimate with him. We're waiting on him. Verse 8 says, "How good you are to me. When people turn to you, Yahweh, they discover how easy you are to please, so faithful and true. Joyfully you teach them the proper path, even when they go astray." So God is a God of grace. I promise that he is not going to smite you if you don't stay strictly inside of his, quote, perfect will. As long as you are seeking him first, you are delighting him by how you live your life, and you are doing your best to follow his will for you, there is grace for you to not quite get it right all the time. And you know what? If you don't get it right, he'll just throw you inside the belly of a whale and spit you out where he wants you to go, like he did with Jonah. So no worries. It just might be something like that might happen. Okay, so verse 9, "Keep showing the humble your path and lead them into the best decision. Bring revelation light that trains them in truth." So our position is to be humble. It says, keep showing the humble your path. As long as you are not, going around being a big know-it-all, you are positioning yourself in humility and seeking his direction, you can trust that he will lead you into the best decision and bring that revelation light that trains you in the truth. Verse 10, "Loving are all the ways of Yahweh, loving and faithful for those who keep his covenant." And verse 12, "Who are they that live in the holy fear of Yahweh? You show them the right path to take." So our position is to live in the holy fear of God. Not afraid of God, but in holy, reverent, awe-inspiring desire to live according to his desires for you, while remembering that he is easy to please. Verses 13 and 14. "Then prosperity and favor will be their portion, and their descendants will inherit the earth. There's a private place reserved for the devoted lovers of Yahweh, where they sit near him and receive the revelation secrets of his promises." So your position is to sit near him as a devoted lover. This is from where you receive the revelation secrets of his promises. Okay, so first you do these 3 things from Romans 12:2. Number 1, you don't live like the world lives. Number 2, you become transformed in how you think and live for Jesus. Number 3, you test and approve the will of God, the thing that you think might be the will of God, even if you're not 100% sure. You take a leap of faith and see if it proves to be right. And then from Psalm 25, the ways to, quote, not live like the world lives, and instead position yourself in a way that helps you know his will, are to, number 1, get into God's presence. Number 2, trust him. Number 3, wrap your heart in God's heart all day long. You wait on him. Number 4, humble yourself. Number 5, live in a holy and reverent fear of God. And number 6, you trust that he is easy to please and that joyfully he will teach you the proper path, even when you go astray. Like even then. If you are on YouTube, here are a couple of other videos that you might want to check out. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a thing, and the like button. Now off you go, girl. Get into God's presence this week and position yourself to know the will of God in your life while remembering that his will might be for you to choose.